I am a contemporary composer. It's the best job in the world, really. I have the privilege of answering the phone periodically and talking to some of the world's greatest soloists, and they say, Andrew, write me a piece. And I'll say, okay, most of the time. Now, in 2009, a call like this came. It was from a brilliant percussionist named Ryan Scott. Ryan is a percussionist who's based in Toronto, and he plays all kinds of amazing stuff from orchestral literature and concertos right down to solo recitals on percussion instruments and right through to innovative mixed media work. And he wanted me to write a piece for him that would use all of his acoustic instruments, things like 5-octave marimba, Balinese gamelan pots, acoustic drums or tom-toms, cymbals, and a bunch of other things, with the addition of some new media. Now, when most people hear that the words contemporary, classical, composer together, they usually forget about the contemporary and the composer part, and they go right to the classical. And their minds usually tend to go back a few hundred years and over an ocean to a long time ago in Europe. Most of those composers that are the classical guys, Mozart, Brahms, Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, they're pretty old. As many of us are still living and not quite that old. And what's interesting about those composers is they wrote for instruments we still write for today, things like piano, cello, violin, clarinet, and so forth. Being a composer today, I still have access to all of that palette, but I have an awful lot more that they didn't have. I can write for things that require electricity, things like saxophones. Just kidding. Just testing you. Things like synthesizers, laptops, and reel-to-reel tapes, and so on and so forth. It just so happens that's one of my areas of interest as an artist is combining the old and the new, and I wanted to do this with the piece with Ryan. So I quickly settled on using a process called live looping. Now, live looping uses live sampling, so there would be a sound happening on stage, and I'll capture that stage in real time live with a microphone. And then that sound that's recorded goes into my laptop instrument and is then recycled, sequenced, shifted up, shifted down, remixed, chopped up, and turned into an instrument in itself. It's a fascinating process. As I designed the software, I quickly became aware that a mouse was not going to be sufficient to run it. If you think about a computer mouse, and most people that do digital media stuff are stuck on computers these days, you can really only control one thing at a time. So just imagine for a second having to navigate our world with a single finger. You wouldn't get very far. You couldn't open a door, you couldn't get into your car, you certainly couldn't play a piano. You certainly couldn't play anything. It took two hands. So it wasn't really enough. So I needed something that was going to allow me to control 5, 6, 7, 10, even 15 parameters at once. And I went to an old solution. It's an old MIDI fader box, a nice robust piece of gear. They've been around for 20, 30 years probably, perhaps longer. And this thing gave me everything I needed. So with a combination of this piece of gear and this piece of gear, I was off to the races. The piece was written, the premiere happened. Everything went pretty good, but there was a serious problem. You see, Ryan, like all great percussionists, is an absolute beauty to watch perform on stage. It's not just an oral thing to experience great music, it's a visual thing as well. And when you watch a percussionist play, especially on large instruments where they move, it actually begins to look like a choreography. So here was Ryan playing this incredibly beautiful music, dancing around with the stage lights glinting off the buttons on his jacket, sweat bouncing off the cymbals as he whacked it with the mallet. I was back here behind my laptop, working my MIDI fader box. Nobody could see what I was doing, and there was the pale glow of the laptop on my face. And after the gig, somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, Andrew, how was Facebook?" And so I thought, this is a problem. I need a way to to be a visual collaborator as well as a sound collaborator. But like all problems, they're really opportunities in disguise. And as I moved to St. John's here a couple of years ago to take up my current position at Memorial University, I had the fortune of meeting Scott Stevenson, and I brought him my problem.
So I caught wind of Andrew's project when I was completing the last year of my engineering degree. And I actually really wanted to be involved because I'd been so interested in electronic music and electronic music production for a long time. And actually I was envious of all the cool stuff he'd been doing at the university. So we got in touch, and like he said, I was hired to design and build a solution to the problems that he's talking about. Now, when we started out, we really had to make sure that we nailed down exactly what those problems were. Because if you don't do this in an engineering project, you're going to end up building something that nobody really has a use for. And while you can sell things to people that they don't really need, that's, that's not exactly our area of expertise. So this was important to us. The first big problem was that all of the solutions out there didn't let the audience see the electronic musician's cause and effect relationship with their music. So as Andrew was talking about with Ryan Scott, when he's playing his percussion and you see the mallet come down, there's a sense of anticipation, and as it hits the cymbal, there's a sense of satisfaction when you hear the sound. And this is a critical part of traditional performance. But most electronic controllers and instruments will sit on a desk facing back towards the performer and leave the audience blind. So we wanted to solve that. The second big problem was that most electronic instruments and controllers out there didn't allow the musician to control a lot of parameters expressively at one time. So, for example, with a guitar, you have 6 strings that you're controlling in 2 different ways with 2 hands. So effectively, you're controlling 12 parameters at once. But with his faders or with his mouse, it's really hard to control more than 2 things at one time. So we really wanted to make sure that with our instrument, you could control many things at once. And I think the idea that guided us the entire way through is that we just wanted this to feel more like a traditional instrument and less like a piece of electronic gear. We wanted to bridge that gap. So once we had figured out the problem, we had to come up with concepts, ideas. And at this point, we realized the huge value of a 3D printer that we had access to on campus. So a 3D printer can basically fabricate plastic parts within hours. So suddenly, we could draw any shape imaginable onto a computer screen and then have that shape in our hands. And that's exactly what we ended up doing. So we came up with this concept really early on, and we thought it looked pretty versatile and unique. But the thing is, when you're building something like this, you have no idea how usable and how intuitive it really is until it's in your hands or until you give it to someone else to try. So we printed it out, and fortunately, it actually felt really good. So we packed that with electronics, and that was our very first prototype, which we call the ARC-16, because there's 16 sensors on the front. And we were really happy with it. Andrew performed with it in Toronto and here in St. John's. We also had a lot of great feedback on it. But we still felt that we could take it a bit further. So we took all of that feedback and we buckled down for another 6 months of development. And the result of that is the prototype that we're going to show you all tonight. And you're going to be the first audience in the world to see it in action. This is the ARC-2. Instrument built from the ground up for electronic music performance. And emphasis on performance. This is something that's meant to live on the stage and not just collect dust in a studio for years.
One of the things that we've realized after this came out of the printer and got packed with electronics is that while it satisfies exactly what I had asked from the original project, we've realized it's actually quite a versatile instrument, and it's actually good for a lot of things that we didn't anticipate, which is kind of great. Anything that you would like to control in a computer or any other kind of digital media, anything that you can put on a dial or a fader, like on a guitar amp or some guitar pedals or whatever, as long as it's electronic, can now be put in your hands and controlled in a very tactile and anthropomorphic way. You can sense how tight you're pushing, how light you're pushing it. You can sense how you move it. And it really puts a little bit more of the human back in the machine.
And not only can we control sound in really new and interesting ways, but we can actually use this to control things like video, lighting, or even video games. I think we kind of like to think of it as an instrument for digital media performance.
So going back to the old world for a brief moment, think about a cello for a moment. A cello has 4 strings, and those strings are set in motion by drawing a bow across them, which is made out of horsehair, and it excites the string into motion, and then it creates a pitch or a sound. As you lengthen or shorten that string, the pitch will go up or down, and that's how melodies are made. It's a very similar concept here with the ARC 2, except instead of controlling a cello string, I'm controlling any old digital sound file I choose to record or bring in. Now, I've brought in some sounds already, and I'll give you an example of what this looks like. So right now, the volumes are all off. Now, as I put my finger up here, I can control volume on a simple slider. This is a good one to show you what the next slider does right next door. This one pushes the sound up or down, depending on the position of my finger. Now, it doesn't seem like too much to control at first, but think back to the cello. There's only 4 strings on the cello, and we're still writing music for it today. So I'll give you a little demo of what this thing can do. Just take a bow. You want to? Thank you for letting us show you the arc tube.